Well, let's start at the beginning, how you caught on this case and what made you want to reach out to the family and represent them.
Well, actually, the family called me, and I was actually traveling when they called. In my office, one of my paralegals said, "Attorney Crump, I really think you should look at this matter." And I was saying, well, vet it for me and let me know what it's about. And then she called me the next day and she said, "Attorney Crump, you should really look at this, look at the video. I talked to his family and they really would like to talk with you." And so when I looked at the video, you just was shocked. Like all the rest of America, you're shocked when you watch this video. You watch a human being being executed and you say, for what? Why did they have to do what they did to him? It's really like his grandmother, Miss Thompson. Why? You just don't understand why you would do that to a human being.
Well, what's interesting is with the video, a lot of people are actually interpreting it differently. We live in an area where a lot of viewers are kind of siding with police on this one, others who say, we don't really know what happened, and others who are completely on Stephon Clark's side. What is your interpretation of that video when you watch it?
Well, it's hard to separate myself from being a civil rights lawyer and, more importantly, from being a black parent. See, many people have the convenience that they know that would never happen to their children, regardless of whatever the situation would be. But we know all too often that young African Americans, young Hispanic people are unnecessarily, unjustifiably killed, even though they are completely unarmed. I hate to have to keep pointing out the obvious, but you have murderers, mass murderers, who are non-African American, non-Hispanic, who are not only given the benefit of the doubt and not shot, but they're offered courtesies, like Dylan Roof, who they took to Burger King to get a burger and some fries after he murdered 9 of the most innocent people that you could ever find in that church in South Carolina. So why isn't the same consideration given to Stephon Clark? Why couldn't they set up a parameter? They had the helicopter overhead. They could track him, but yet they chose to, within seconds, make the decision that we're going to take him down.
Well, it sounds like you're pretty confident that you guys have a strong case here, just based off the preliminary information that's been released, as well as the body camera footage. Obviously, you've represented a lot of families in similar cases. How strong of a case do you think you have, and what makes that case so strong? Because a lot of people in our market are wondering, why was he seemingly running, or if he was the suspect that police believed was breaking car windows. Do you think that matters?
I think that people murdered people. People kill multiple people, and they still didn't get the response from law enforcement that young black men get for having cell phones. They never get the benefit of the doubt, the benefit of consideration, the benefit of possibility that maybe we should try a less restrictive measure other than lethal force. And so that's the question that this community has to answer, because there are certain people in this community who are fed up. They're saying enough is enough. The statistics bear out that since 2015, there have been 73 individuals killed by police who were unarmed. Over 70 of them, as high as 72 of them, were African American. I think 2 of them were biracial. But those are the statistics. You have to ask yourself, why is that happening? Why is that happening?
Well, a few things I wanted to ask you also about the body camera footage.
I would say this, and I don't know yet, but we're going to certainly research the issue. In Sacramento, we believe in the last 2 years, there have been also police-involved fatalities, and I believe it's 6, and I believe at least 5 of those were black men. So do you mean to tell me, even though African Americans are the minority in Sacramento, that every time the police use lethal force to kill somebody, that it's, I don't even know what the statistics is, 92% black people. So you're telling us no white people are committing crimes where the police feel that they need to use lethal force? I mean, this becomes very, very important questions to ask when you just look at the data. So either one or two things are going on. Either the police aren't well trained to interact with minorities, we need more implicit bias training, or they value black life less than they value other lives because they're so quick to take lethal force in any kind of interaction.
Well, speaking of, police have released that, not the identities of the officers, but that one of the officers is black.
Yes.
What do you make of that?
That there still is a lack of training with implicit bias, that you're more prone, you're quicker to use lethal force when the suspect is black or Hispanic, regardless if the police officer is black or white. And these are the statistics, not just in Sacramento, but all over America. And so really the ethnicity of the police officer does not weigh as heavy as the ethnicity of the victim who has been killed by the police, because that's the number that we see is consistent. Regardless if it's a white, black, Asian, Hispanic officer, the people they're inclined to shoot are young black and brown people, not young white people.
There was a moment shortly after they fired the 20 shots where they had said we need backup, and they also mentioned bringing in non-lethal weapons, but that was after they had already fired their guns. What do you make of that?
I think, again, they're so, I guess, trained. Well, I'll take that back. There's a lack of training when it comes to what to do in a situation, regardless if the individual is black or Hispanic or white. What we see all too often is they show restraint when it's a young white person versus when it's a young black person. And that is an issue that is really critical to people in communities of color, because we pray every day that our children won't be killed by the people who are supposed to protect and serve them. It is a real fear for us, and many people outside of communities of color can't even fathom that thought, that the police will actually kill their children. So hopefully we can learn from this tragedy and try to heal not only the Clark family with giving them justice, but also try to heal this community knowing that they're going to do better with using less restricted means of force to interact with people. There's so many things they could have did differently that night. I mean, the experts who we're talking to, who are trained police veterans, can count just on a mere observation of the video a dozen things that were done wrong, that they did not have to do, that they could have set up perimeters. They could have made sure the helicopter put the spotlight on. They could have used less restrictive measures versus the gun. I mean, it's so many things, and they say, well, no, now you're just Monday morning quarterbacking. No, you're not. You're applying the policies and saying, now what other things could have been done other than executing this young man who you knew nothing about in his backyard? Mm-hmm. What else could have been done to give, him a chance to live out the fulfillment of his destiny that his family prayed for?
Well, his family is saying that the backyard, that window, was used to communicate with family members inside the home so people could get in because the front doorbell wasn't working. So it sounds like they're still saying they believe he was just trying to get home to his grandma's house where he was staying, and they do not believe he was the suspect who was vandalizing the cars. Is that correct?
Well, the family doesn't believe anything that the Sacramento Police Department is saying at all,
about what he was doing.
About what he was doing, about any of this. Because remember, they were told the next day the reason they had to shoot 20 times killing him was because he had a gun. Well, then they walked that back. It turned out he didn't have a gun. Then they was told this thing about a toolbar or crowbar or something. They had to walk that back because it turned out he only had a cell phone. And finally they had to come clean and say he was unarmed. And then when we watched the video, we see that he wasn't threatening the police officers. He was trying to get away from the police officers. The police officers never identified themselves. They never gave him warning. You know, it's 17 seconds from when they first interact with them until you hear those bullets.
Well, from the family's perspective, let me ask you, for the people who are saying it looks like he was running away from police, you know, growing up in South Sacramento, I know the Meadowview area isn't necessarily the safest neighborhood. Does the family believe maybe he didn't think it was police officers pursuing him and that it could have been something else, that he was maybe scared and running home? Or have they said anything about what they think he was trying to do?
I'm sure we'll vet that and explore all of those things in great detail as we continue forward with the legal matters. But the one thing we know for certain, the courts have said running from the police does not give police the right to use lethal force, especially as it relates to minorities who are often fearful of the police. You know, they do the statistics with young minorities and they say young white people believe that when they see the police, it's their friend. They run to them. That's a different experience for many minorities, and we got to work on that. We really have to work on that, not just in Sacramento, but all over America, why young people fear that the police will kill me versus help me.
And then another big question everyone has is about, towards the end of the video, it sounds like an officer saying, or someone saying, hey, mute, and then you hear the audio go out for the last few minutes. From a legal perspective, what do you make of that?
Well, certainly the Citizens Review Board have contacted the family and asked about their concerns about the inappropriateness of them muting their audio, where it just seems nefarious. It seems very suspicious that they're trying to conspire to be deceitful at that point. We have to look carefully at the policies and procedures, of course, but from a reasonable man's standard, it sounds like they realized they had made some mistakes and they did not want to continue to communicate how they cover up the mistakes. We'll get into that fully. We have to vet that out.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of questions still, a lot of things we don't know. As the family's attorney, what are the biggest questions for you that you are waiting on answers for?
Well, certainly right now we're going to have an independent autopsy. The family wants to know, as any family would want to know, how many times was he shot? And they keep asking that question. The other question the family has asked me is, why didn't they knock on their front door? On the other videos, they knocked on people's doors saying, we're going to go in the backyard. Obviously, they could have covered both the ways out of the backyard. They had 2 officers there. They had a helicopter overhead. They could have tracked him. Why didn't they knock on the door and say, you know, there's somebody in your backyard. We want to check it out, and so we just want to alert you. Because the family believes, had that been done, this all would have been prevented. And they're just thousands of questions the family has, as you would imagine. His grandmother has to sleep in the bed every night, less than 3 feet away from where her grandson was executed. And that's, to me, Francis, that is the most just terrible thing about all of this. When you hear Ms. Thompson say that they called 911 when they heard the shots, her husband, Mr. Thompson, then the police told them when they were all outside that night, stay in your house, don't come out your house, and don't look in the backyard. There was a shooting back in the backyard. They follow the police instructions. The next morning, the police knock on the door and they ask her, "Can we see a picture of your grandson?" And she says, "Yes. I hope y'all didn't shoot one of my grandboys, because that's how they enter the house, through the back way, by knocking on the window." And lo and behold, that's indeed what they did, killed one of her grandchildren. And so it's just difficult for her now, because she's thinking, is there anything we could have done? Is there anything more we could have done? They had just seen him about 3.5 hours before this. He left the house around 6 o'clock. He was happy, he was normal. They never thought that was going to be the last time they saw Stephon Clark alive.
And it seemed like in earlier interviews, when his grandmother was doing interviews, she was angry, she was in disbelief, and then obviously if you saw her today at the press conference, and then I know after you were with her, it sounds like this is when she's finally come to terms with what happened and is just unconsolable.
Yeah, it certainly is a stage by stage that they have to go through to try to heal. Certainly receiving the body at the funeral home was something difficult, having to.
And that happened when?
Today.
Earlier, before the press conference.
Right. Obviously, having to select the clothes that they're going to put on him for the homegoing services is just extremely emotional. You just really believe that your children are going to bury you, your grandchildren are going to bury you, not you burying your grandchildren. Let that sink in for a minute to the people in Sacramento, that they're having to bury their child and he was unarmed. That never should have happened. It's just so unnatural on so many levels. They don't even have a word to define burying your children. You know, when you lose a spouse, you know, you're a widow. When children lose their parents, they're orphans. There's no word to define a parent who has lost a child, especially in this senseless, unnecessary way.
So Sacramento has its first black police chief, relatively new. A lot of people are commending him for releasing the video footage so early. Some people also saying, or in an interview with us, he mentioned he told his officers, you know, let everyone protest, let them get out their anger and frustration, do not engage. What are your thoughts based off of the other families you've represented in different areas and how our police chief is responding?
I think really the whole issue is about trust. There is a great distrust between communities of color and law enforcement. And I think the way you heal that issue, you have to have transparency, number one, accountability, number two, and that's how you get to trust. So I commend the city leaders and the police leaders for attempting to be transparent. But that's only one part of the equation. You also have to hold people accountable, because we want there to be a deterrent from this happening again to young people in our community. We want police to at least try to show restraint when it comes to our children too, like they show, seems like all over America for everybody else, there's restraint. But when it comes to black lives, it seems to be shoot first, ask questions later. Now, we want our children to come home too.
Well, part two, accountability. Let's talk about the steps moving forward. What does the timeline look like in terms of the legal process? I know you guys are calling for an independent autopsy. There are some reports saying you guys want an independent investigation outside of Sac Police. So for people wondering, what do we think this legal timeline looks like? And are you planning on suing the city at some point for wrongful death?
Well, the family is prepared to exercise every legal option available to them to get justice for Stephon Clark and his children and his family. And so we certainly will be moving forward with legal actions, something that they can control. They can't control anything that happens in the way of accountability for these officers. Only our elected officials can do that. You know, they have to defer to a grand jury likely a DA, what he's going to say in that secret grand jury proceeding. All we know, if they're from the lessons from Ferguson, Missouri, with Michael Brown and Eric Gardner in Staten Island, that what happens in that grand jury proceeding is just a mystery to all. You can see stuff on video, but yet they go back in that grand jury proceeding and they come back and say there was nothing that the officers did wrong. And it's just very suspicious to many minorities that grand juries always, find probable cause to charge us with crimes, but it's very rare when we're the victims and the police are the people responsible for brutalizing us or killing us, that they're ever found to have probable cause to actually charge them with a crime. So that is an issue that we have to deal with.
But next steps, I know that the funeral's Thursday. People plan on showing up at City Council tomorrow. So in terms of what's happening next, at least we're on your end.
Well, we're doing the independent autopsy. Hopefully we'll get some answers there, and we'll continue to try to march towards getting some justice for Stephon Clark and his children and his family.
What is your message, or what is the family's message to try to keep things peaceful?
The family of Stephon Clark is very appreciative of all the protesters, all the people standing up for justice, especially the young people. They have been very responsible in their expression of their First Amendment rights, and we continue to pray that they will do so in a peaceful way, especially as we observe next week the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, who always stood for nonviolence. Violence is never, ever the answer.